I'd like to call this meeting to order, this regular City Council work session on this Tuesday, February 17th. The clerk will call the roll.
Mayor Walcott.
Here.
Vice Mayor Williams.
Here.
Councilmember Winters.
Here.
Councilmember Biondo.
Here.
Councilmember Villanueva. Councilmember Hall.
Here.
And Councilmember Tandy.
Here.
Thank you.
And if you'll all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item 1 on this regular agenda.
Presentation and discussion, updating City Council on the development of his signature gateway program for the City of Surprise.
Ms. Keller.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members. In many ways, this agenda item may seem like it's an extension from our last conversations and discussions. And with that, it's because we have a lot of public input. I believe some of your comments from the last presentations were that we were getting a lot of concrete feedback. There's things that we can kind of move forward with and address some of the comments that the public is stating to us. And so we started to look at the budget item for a city entry monument in the fiscal year 2015. There's $250,000 for that line item. And we started to look at how we can best use that budget. And working with the Public Works Department, we identified that it might be best to spend some time looking at a broader picture of developing a gateway monument program rather than just one individual monument. So this evening we'll talk about the purpose of gateways, signature gateway program, and then what the next steps could be. And as I go through the presentation, you'll notice there's a lot of gateway images. And one thing I'd like to have you think about is, as you look at these images, what is the story behind each of those cities? And some of these I'm sure you'll be familiar with. But what is the message? What's the story? What's the image and perception that you have for these types of gateways? The upper right-hand corner one is Melrose Place. You may be familiar with it. It's in downtown Phoenix. I just wanted to show you that one to give you an idea of costs. That does span the entire width of 7th Avenue, so it's a pretty broad span, and that gateway cost $500,000. And it identifies the Melrose Place from Indian School to Camelback on 7th Avenue for all the businesses along that length. The other ones are giving you an example of major gateways and secondary gateways, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So what is the purpose of gateways? Visually communicate a message, a story. It communicates to residents, visitors, and people who pass through communities. What type of community is it? So you can start to see what some of the images are and how some of the cities have started to tell their story and give you that image as you're passing through. It's usually a very distinct image, gives you a perception or a message that you can leave with. It creates a sense of place. Sometimes it tells you about the values of that community, the quality of life, and the lifestyles. But most importantly, I think that most gateways are a very unique identifier, and it's a brand. You start to brand what your community looks like. So every time someone sees a feature like that, they know they're in that city. It's a visual cue. They can be used for hierarchical importance, from a major to a minor to just a district area. It's a unifying element that provides consistency of that message throughout the community, and it can be a marketing or promotion to help promote the community. And when you think about wayfinding, sometimes it helps you identify by a landmark where you're at in the community if you're in a bigger valley area like we are. They can be a single or a multi-purpose element. They can be in conjunction with transportation infrastructure, whether it's a bridge or a residential or pedestrian amenity. Sometimes cities use gateways as a gateway park. It brings people into the area. St. Louis Arch is very much like that. If you've been there, it's a very large park. It's a gateway to the city and to the west. They integrate typically public art in the space. And architecture, sometimes in some cities, use their most signifying building as the gateway to the community. So I wanted to give you a little overview of the existing gateway signs that we do have in the city, and some of the challenges with locations and perception or images. The lower right-hand image is 500 feet within the city limits along Bell Road, and then almost a mile into it, we have another larger gateway monument. So it starts to identify, well, where are you really getting into the city? The other thing is to look at how many different types of signs and gateways we have, what types of materials. We have a variety of materials, a variety of images. What is the message that we see as we start to look at all the different types of signs we have for City of Surprise? And then when we start to look at special district signs, again, this is an opportunity for us to brand the community very similar to what a major gateway might be. So when we look at district signs, are they all of the same material? Are they different materials? Do they tell the story of Surprise and still have a unique identifier for their special district? So when we start to look at a gateway monument program, this is a very preliminary diagram of the red stars being a major gateway monument. These might be monuments that range in size from 10,000 square feet area to an acre, maybe from $250,000 to some examples that I've shown you are $1 million or more. The yellow stars are secondary gateways. These may be something of the manner of a 5,000 to 10,000 square foot and be in the order of 100,000 to 250,000. And then the small dots that you see over in the right-hand lower corner, the potential district signatures. If you see that image, you can start to see how you can use a signature program to identify where you're at in the city. So in that area along Bell Road where you have two secondary by the yellow stars and two primary on Grand Avenue, marking the entry into the city, and then as a district within the original town site on the right-hand side of the Grand Avenue, and then Surprise Center on the west side, you can start to see how they all work together to tell the story about Surprise, but they would be in different levels of hierarchy and levels of images. This is a little further in, again, looking at that area that's pretty significant, entering into the City of Surprise off of Bell Road, the original town site on the right, Surprise Center on the left. The red circles and shows you where gateway opportunities might be for elements. These could be visual elements that start to signify the gateway district and that you're in Surprise and tell the story. This is a plan that was developed in 2009 that really started to look at Grand Avenue as a gateway, as part of the gateway district. And it would include major gateways as well as special districts for the original town site or the heritage district. The Gateway Center Plaza, that would be more of a multi-use gateway with a signature building. Signature landscaping also creates more of a gateway, lets you know that you're entering into a special area within the valley. And then pedestrian level. So we have all different levels that we can identify monumentation. Again, major gateways, this kind of gives you an idea of the different levels. This is something that we would look at as we move forward of what is the level, exactly what would it include, and what would they look like. But the idea is to give you an understanding that each of these components would be related, whether it's with materials or a common image, so that whatever level it is, wherever it is in the city, you start to see that repetition of that branding of what the city is. So the economic and social values of gateways, it promotes a positive image of a vibrant, growing community. It communicates a clear message. Many of the comments that we've had in the public input so far in the last 4 or 5 weeks, some of the questions we asked about what would be hard to change, image, what ranked up there with perception. So this would be a means to start to address some of the things that they were saying. It creates a sense of place. So this can be a major element or a common element that helps create that sense of place. Again, it starts to give visitors and residents here what our image and our identity is. So the next steps is we would proceed with developing a gateway monument program in conjunction with the general plan elements, the public arts master plan, and the heritage district overlay. But most importantly, I think we would like to use the part of the $250,000 to hire a creative artist design team, a design team that would be made up of graphic artists or environmental designers, artists themselves, to develop what that looks like. What is that signature that would be repeated at different levels and come up with alternatives for us to look at, to show to the public, and then identify what those prototypical designs would be that we would be able to implement as we would identify specific locations and funding became available and as growth started to develop. We also think that this is an important element to be able to start integrating into the public arts master plan process, using that as a venue to get some input on the prototypical designs or the alternatives that the team might come up with, and also starting to integrate that creativeness and that art component into features of the Signature Gateway program itself. So with that, I'll open it for questions or comments.
Members, questions, comments? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. I like the thought about the unifying message, et cetera. I'm all for that in terms of the way it looks and the material and all that. When I read through this, it kind of, it isn't what I had in mind. Okay, now that's just me. Maybe the rest of the council is fine with it. But I just thought it was way out of budget. I just don't want to spend that. Me personally, I don't want to spend that kind of money on signage. I think we can do something simple and elegant that has a unifying message and consistency to it that conveys a very clean, efficient city, but with aspirations. Okay, I don't want us to be something that we aren't. You know, we're a growing city. We have a lot of middle-class families. We have retirees, but I think the signage. And I'm not an artist. I like the fact that you're gonna. I like bringing in a designer. And the thing about it is, though, that's where the money is spent, is in the design, because anything we agree to in the design impacts the economics of that signage forever. Okay, and so I want to me personally, I want to make sure that it's got a well-defined budget and that we get creative about the way it looks. Okay, that's my comments. Thanks.
Councilwoman Villanueva.
I wanted to go back to that one area where you had the red dots. I wanted to know, what is that signature dots? What do you mean by that? The signature dots a little further back. Yeah, right there on the corner.
Right, so it's in this area right here.
Uh-huh.
So those would be like a sign, like the original town site right now has 2 different types of signs. Uh-huh. And so when I use the word signature, it's really meant to be that wherever you see that element or a element like that, it's signifying that you're in the city of Surprise, but you're in a special area. So a signature dot would be a smaller sign to about the scale of what's there at the original town site right now. But there's 2 different types of signs in the original town site right now. If you look at the two different types, you have kind of the slump block looking one, and then you have a more modern block. So the consistency of aesthetics and what the message is for the original town site is not as solidified. Consistent, yes.
Well, I thought we were going to have consistent throughout the city.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what's existing. But you
Right.
mentioned that maybe we could have some smaller signs in that area.
Yes, I would envision that a team might come up with materials or a specific design element that is used throughout all different levels of design, or signs, I'm sorry. But yet it allows some unique, especially for the special districts like the original town site, the recreation campus, it would still allow some individuality of those. So there may be a combination, or even the tech accelerator, or the city properties within the original town site. They might all have a sign, but there would be a consistent element on those signs, not just the logo, but how it's designed, that when you look at it, you recognize it. You know, similar to when you see a stop sign, you don't really read it, but you know by the shape it's a stop sign, so that when you come up with this unique element, you always see it, you know you're in the city of Surprise.
One other question. On one of the signs, it has part of it white. What does that mean? On one of the signs, it's part of it is white.
White?
And that's the only one.
One of the signs that I showed you here?
The dot, not the dots, but the red marks, right here. See, part of it has white on it. I just wanted to know what that meant.
Highway 60.
Over the Highway 60. On top of that.
Oh.
Yeah.
That, it's just the graphic on top of the map, so it's showing the
Oh, yeah.
symbol
This
of
is
the
actually the
roadway.
symbol for Highway 60, and this dot is right over the top of it.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay.
It was just an awkward placement. That's okay. Thanks, Councilwoman. Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. I do think it's important that we brand ourselves look like we know what we're doing. So I do think a common design, maybe for the main thing, Surprise, so you can see it. I like the mountains, I like the Surprise, Arizona, and there's aspects of that probably can be used. I also like the idea of, special districts maybe having a little extra, this is a community park or something like that. So it gives a little more definition. Okay, you're in Surprise, now you're right there. So I do think we need to come up with some kind of design. And so I like that effort. I'm not ready to spend $500,000 because we got other competing project interests, but I do think there might be a day when maybe through developer agreements might be able to have a fantastic branding capability, but we need to show them the vision of what we're trying to do. So I think there's importance in getting the design. I think there's also some importance in, if you can go back to the existing gateways real quick. You've got a couple temporary ones down in the bottom right-hand side, one with a triangle that just says, hey, we're in Surprise. And the other one, I think, is used to help advertise our home builders or whatever else is there. My preference, I like them both, but my preference would be if we could get more of the ones that are rounded and get more help out there to people knowing where they're at. I specifically, I used your map here, and I think that's probably a lot less expensive right now, so we can take care of some of the interim things. And it looks nice, but all the southern entrances, for instance, as soon as you get to Litchfield and Peoria, Reams and Peoria, Bullard and Peoria, let everybody know that is the city limits, so they know who to call. Same thing, Sunrise entrance to Sun City Grand. So once you cross across Grand from Sun City West, they know that Sun City Grand is part of Surprise. So I'd kind of like to move forward with some of that money to do some of that now, so we can get at least an idea and show everybody this is Surprise, with a rounded one, with the capability of adding on, maybe I don't know if there's a fee for the builders to add a little banner for their development, but I'd kind of like to have that directional, because we are still growing and we're starting to grow again, not only for the home builders, but new businesses when we open those up and things like that. So those are some of my comments, and I do think the bigger, grander, if we have that design and can paint that vision, we might be able to share it with, say, a developer that might pay for it as something. Because we just have a pile of capital projects that are fighting for attention right now, and these might not make the cut, but we still need to do something. Thanks.
Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you. I also agree with the sense of a unifying design, whether it's in the major gateway or the secondary gateway. And I also like the idea, by the way, of some sort of design team coming in with some prototypes and suggestions and so on. And assuming we can't do it all at one time, I think that initial decision about what that unifying factor is so important, because once you start doing piece by piece by piece, it's so easy to lose sight of that, whether it's 3 years from now or 5 years from now or however long from now, that we're doing some additional part. And that's why this Gateway Sign Master Plan integrated, as you suggested, into the overall master plan, I think so important. But I want to go back to the emphasis of the initial decision about what that unifying design would be. I think is a really, really important decision, not only for now, but as you project into the future, as more and more of these signs, as Councilmember Tandy indicated, as developments occur and so on, as more and more of these designs would be needed. I can't resist a side note, since you had it as one of the examples. The St. Louis Arch is literally by title called the Gateway Arch, particularly because it's gateway to the west. Not many people, well, maybe a lot of people do. I don't know whether it's universally known that you can actually get in a little car and ride to the top of that Gateway Arch. And I don't know how many feet that is up there, but it's an amazing view of that entire panorama across 2 states, at least across 2 states, Missouri and Illinois. It's just a fascinating symbol, and obviously talk about a universally recognized symbol with a particular identification as a gateway to the city and a gateway to the west. It serves that area very well.
Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. Going back to the existing signs, again, it just strikes me as each one is, yeah, okay, I get it, but it doesn't. If you were a corporate branding person, you'd be fired, because you got to have that consistency. One that really, well, they all kind of stick out on their own, but one that sticks out even more is the Techcelerator. I know the council's had discussions over prior years, but I haven't had an opportunity to weigh in on that. But I think that'd be a good discussion to bring back, because I think not only do we brand the city, but we brand a real fantastic asset that now has a fantastic success story. And how do we use that to not only brand us, but brand the people we're trying to promote in there in a way that makes sense, doesn't distract, but looks classy. So right now I'm not feeling that sign at all.
Councilwoman Villanueva.
I was just suggesting that maybe the existing signs that we have that just says Surprise, community, whatever, maybe adding something a little higher to those signs that would attract attention would be nice. Like for example, well, there's one here. Maybe adding something nice to what's existing there now, and just getting more attention to that sign. That's my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm sensing a consensus that we agree to the concept of creating a unifying theme. And there's one slide There's one slide back, and I love this one slide with the Texcelerator sign because that's something that's bounced around this council for a long time. But I think there was one slide back where you have the entryway into, no, it's the next one. There we go. And I know the one on the right, upper right-hand side is one of Skip's favorites. So. And we've all heard extensive comment about the two on the left-hand side of the screen here. So getting back to the concept of a unifying theme, and I think that that was the intent of the council originally when we workshopped this big picture over at the communiversity. We talked about planning in the future, and I don't think the intention was ever to build a St. Louis arch or a building that was a gateway in and of itself, but it was really to start planning and thinking about that, that unifying concept and theme so that we could brand the city in a way that was sustainable over the long haul instead of having all these different messages throughout the city which don't bring us together into one surprise. And the other thing is I see it, and as Councilmember Tandy mentioned, as an opportunity to work with new businesses that might be coming in that might want to participate in some of that branding with the city. And it certainly is an opportunity with the Texcelerator, that sign. So having a plan is great. Having a theme is fantastic. And knowing where we're going to start is going to be really important for us. So I don't think that with $250,000 we ever expected to do much more than come up with a really great plan and maybe get a very modest start. And so I don't think any of us have visions of grandeur on the issue of signage, but we know that we can do better. And if you all will recall, El Mirage put quite a bit of effort into branding themselves, and it's rather effective in putting together those signs when you enter into El Mirage. You can see it, it's clear, and I think it says a lot of positive things. At the end of the day, that's what we want, is to say something very positive about our city. So I think you're on the right track.
Okay.
And I think we all agree that we should move forward with putting together a plan and having that plan ready for us.
Great.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 2 is presentation and discussion regarding the capital improvement program, prioritization, budget implications, and possible funding strategies and alternatives.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council.
Good evening.
I'm very excited to be before you this evening to talk about the capital improvement program. But I want to tell you one of the reasons I'm excited is just for all the things happening here in Surprise. And I really want to call out, it's so much fun to follow a person like Jackie, who's putting together a plan for us to accomplish our dreams. It's really exciting for me to sit and just be in awe at this morning's State of the City address and the work that Diane Arthur and her team did to just bring professionalism and just beautiful images. And then finally, I'm very excited to be here today, in particular, to be joined by my very humble colleague, April Reynolds, who's in the house this evening. And in fact, before I get started, for good luck for me, if you could join me in welcoming her.
Welcome back. It's good to have you here.
So about 2 months ago, we were before you to give like a 50,000-foot look at our capital program and do a very, very rough look at how big could a bond program be and what would be the right size for it. And we talked about projects, but it's 50,000 feet. Then 2 weeks ago, we were before you with like a 20,000-foot look, and you may recall these very wonderful pieces of colored paper that had 3 groups of assets, and they were in rank order. And during that discussion, I'll tell you, it was a spirited discussion, and you brought up some great points. And what we're back here with you today is to try to synthesize some of what we heard from you and present some options to you. But to frame, one of the things that you asked us to do was to take these 3 sheets of assets and kind of prioritize them into one sheet or into one presentation, which I think we presented to you a week or so ago. The other thing that you asked us to do was to give you what are the most critical projects that we need to deliver within the next 18 months. And we have that up with you right now. I think we have copies of this in this room too, if there's anybody here in the audience would like them. And then finally, you wanted a little bit more detail on what staff's recommended projects would be if we were to go forward with the bond program. So if you should have those documents, I'll be referring to them a little bit in the presentation. And then finally, before I move to the next slide, our discussion, we talked extensively about a community partner, the Dysart District and the override. And we talked about the importance of working with them. We also talked about voter turnout and making sure that we're doing things here in the city to maximize everyone's opportunity to have a voice and participate in the decision making. So with all that feedback, what I would like to share with you is sort of 3 options for us to frame this conversation. I'm going to try not to talk for a long time because I think the real essence of this workshop item is going to be your discussion. But the 3 options that I want to present before you are proceeding, 1, with a bond program going to the voters in November 2015. The second option would be proceeding with the bond program in the next year or 2. And the third option is postponing a bond or capital bond program indefinitely, and kind of want to talk about what each of those 3 looks like. Now, before I get into the detail of each individual one, based on listening to you last time we were together, I think there are some things that we need to talk about, and actually staff is recommending that we do in all 3 options. And the first one is for us to focus on improving voter turnout here in Surprise. So I actually had some initial conversations with our city clerk. She's very excited about the possibilities. She's done a lot of outreach with her fellow city clerks across the valley and done some national research already, so I can see us coming forward to you with some ideas to enhance, to make it easier for people to participate, to encourage people to participate, that's something that we need to do regardless of what option, and probably in fact regardless of whether we do a bond program or not. I think it's just a good thing for us here in Surprise. Secondly, I believe that we as an organization, and certainly the city organization that I have the honor to lead, that we need to be partners with the Dysart School District and work with them hand in hand as they move forward on their upcoming bond override. And in fact, this evening, many of the department directors will not be at our council meeting. They'll be over at a stakeholders meeting at the district offices. And for us to be able to learn and be able to communicate to everyone that we come in contact with the essence of what the Dysart District is trying to accomplish and the benefit that a strong education system is for our city as a whole, regardless of whether you think about economic development or quality of life or children's futures. And so I think in any of these alternatives, that's something that we need to strongly do. The third thing that we need to do, and if I could refer you now to the list of projects that I have that totals about $33 million that we've identified as critical projects. Regardless of the options, we need to work on these set of projects. All but one of them is currently funded, and I believe that we have an opportunity to fund the very last item with some creative things that we could do. And then finally, I want to put on the table, I think I've had a conversation with a couple of the members that currently we have a policy in Surprise that we need a general fund reserve balance that's equal or above 2 months of our operating expenses. And currently we have in excess of that amount. And in fact, our excess over that 2 months is about $12 million. So for example, we may conservatively be able to say, do we want to have more than 2 months and maybe we want to increase it, or we might say we want to use that one-time money, let's say pick $10 million to do some additional capital projects or some other projects that I think we've talked to you about, some of the maintenance work that we have sort of not done over the last few years. We may want to catch up on that, but we need to take a good look at that general fund balance and make a decision as an organization what we want to do with that. So with that now, the final thing I want to just, it's really a disclaimer. My last stop point on this slide, we continue to refine and scrub the numbers that we've been giving you in the lists. And I just want to let you know, if you took all the lists we've given you, let's say the last 4 meetings, you're going to find new projects on, or some projects, the name has changed. We are continually refining this capital improvement plan. It's something that is, this 5-year plan is something that we are building from the ground up, and we're just continuing to do work on it. So if you see some discrepancies, call them out, but in some ways I expect us to be doing that over the next few months. Okay, let me go through the 3 options then. The first one is moving forward in November 2015. And doing all the things I said, working with Dysart, voter turnout, the other items I mentioned. In addition, the steps would be, as we talked about last week, establishing a bond committee. And to give an example of what that bond committee would be, we could combine our Planning and Zoning Commission along with the Community and Recreation Services Commission into a large committee. We could include representatives from the Dysart School District, and we could also include a representative or 2 from the Chamber. So we could have business, education, planning and zoning, and community and recreation, which should give us a broad perspective, I think potentially a balanced perspective. That committee would do several things. They would take a look at the proposed list of projects and see if they make sense. They could see if there are other projects that would be better for the community. They could clearly understand, have community meetings, and engage in the community in community discussions about whether or not this is valuable and worthwhile. And then finally, as you can see, if we follow this this timeline for November 2015, they would come back and provide a recommendation to you. Number 1, whether or not it makes sense to move forward. If so, what that bond program would look like. All right. And then you can see the remainder of this would be a call for an election vote, public education, and the election would occur in November 2010. So option 1 is November 2015, sorry. Option 1, November 2015. The last item I have on this option 1 is if you turn to the single sheet that has the bond program recommendations from staff. The bottom line is $59.9 million, and it's broken up into 3 areas. One of the conversations that we had last time is the number, for instance, $60 million may have sticker shock to it. And so I broke this into 3 categories: public safety, transportation, and community and recreation. And you can see the projects associated with that. And when I get done yakking here, you could ask some specific questions. But also on this list, In addition, when we were to move forward or consider moving forward on capital projects, we not only need to worry about the cost of building them, but we need to worry about the cost of operating them. And so, for example, on the 14 or so projects that we would recommend, their annual operating cost after all of them are completed is about $4.2 million. It would take us about 5 years to build up to that, but that would be the cost that we'd need to build into our budget each year to properly operate those. Okay. Now, let me give you option 2 in a nutshell. That is considering going forward to the people in either November 2016 or November 2017. And if we take this option, again, we would work hand in hand with Dysart, starting right now. We would look at all potential funding sources in our general fund. So that's one of the reasons I mentioned our general fund reserve. So we would be looking under every doormat, everywhere we could, to identify capital money to keep us moving forward during that year or two period, to take care of the critical asset needs that we have here in the city. We would initiate a long-term education and communication effort with the community to be able to talk about our needs for capital programs here in the city. And not only do we see working with Dysart on this current override, but I think something that I learned very greatly 2 weeks ago from you, Dysart's going to have capital needs in the future too. We're going to need to always be working hand in hand, because we're quite possibly going to find ourselves on the same election with them maybe 2 years from now or in years to come. So we need to be in good contact with the school district, as we both share the same property tax rolls as one another. And then finally, the third option, which is really to postpone a bond program using secondary property taxes indefinitely. With this option, what we would need to do is determine if there are any other potential funding sources. I think you may all recall that we do have a little room in our primary property tax that we could use to help increase our, let's say, annual funding that could help us with capital program. We would look at any other funding alternative possible, but currently, and as Lindsay's mentioned in the past, we probably have the capacity of about $2 million a year pay as you go under our current sort of financial look. So if you just think about, say, the $60 million that presented to you, or even the $33 million that we currently have funded, unless there's a large change, it will take us quite some time. So I think obviously option 3 professionally is my least favorite option, but at the same time, if option 3 would be the will of the council, we would do our best to do a good job to complete as much as we could. So with that, I think we're prepared, and we have members of the departments that have capital projects prepared to answer any questions and really look for your direction and guidance on how we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And council members, I really do appreciate the leadership that Bob has shown in reaching out directly to Dysart and offering his staff up to help work with the school district. I think that's really, really important. We all know that we started off with a lot of celebration this morning, and I think it's good, and we should continue celebrating. But I think one of the things that we need to continue to foster and celebrate is our relationship with Dysart. Because there's no question, at the end of the day, they're educating the people that we are trying to bring here for economic opportunity. So it's clearly a partnership. And council members, I just wanted to kind of kick off this conversation by telling you that I had a really wonderful conversation with an old friend from the city of Surprise, Bill Pupo, who has joined us this evening in the back of the room. And Bill reminded me that back in the day, there were times when the city literally was managing the IT, was working on the IT projects with the school district, with vehicle maintenance, any number of things when the city, when the school district itself was somewhat going through its beginning phases. And so the fact that that we're talking about working with them is nothing new. It's just something that we need to do on a more, I think, a more overt level, ongoing and into the future. Because as you point out, Bob, there will be times in the future where we will be sharing ballot time with them, no matter what happens. But at the end of the day, they did a magnificent job of responding to the growth that this council, maybe not this council, but previous councils approved. And so it's really an important relationship. When I was talking to Bill earlier today, I said, you know, we really want to have school district involvement in these discussions moving forward. And he used the word cross-pollination and suggested that not only maybe should we have school district people on our committee, but that perhaps we should be on their committee, which effectively we're doing by integrating all the work with our staff. So for that reason, I think it's an important step forward that we keep the conversation going in that kind of committee structure. And I know that the Dysart group, which doesn't really even have a formal name tonight, is moving forward in talking with someone who can help walk them through the process and voter engagement. And I think it's critical for us to be involved in voter engagement, no matter what happens, because we all know that it is frustrating to see a very low voter turnout, frustrating to see a Dysart override go down when the very most closely affected people weren't even voting because they didn't know it would be that big of a deal. It's a big deal. So I would hope that we would all stand together with our school district, and our school district has expressed an interest in standing with us. So I would hope that we would move forward in that spirit and truly be one Surprise. So council members, let's start this conversation and see what you think about the proposals. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Bob, for all this work.
Thank you.
Really did a great job. Thanks, Lindsay. I guess there's a lot to be talked about. I don't know if we're going to do it all tonight, but one of the things that I think is that I think we need to take a look at our overage of the reserve and really take a look how strategically we can spend that. And I mean in FY16, in the budget process coming up. And I know there's some road projects that really could use help. We've talked about it, but I mean, it's up to the council to agree on. But I think we need to really take a look at that. And I'm thinking maybe 10 million of that 27 million and say, look, these projects need to be done in FY16 and just go for it and do it and give it back to our residents in terms of benefits. Okay. You know, is it Greenway? Is it Litchfield? I don't know. We can talk about that, but having the money available to give back to our residents in terms of value, I think is really important rather than sitting on the money. Okay? I'm all for having a reserve, but I think it's too much right now, me personally, and I think we need to give it back to the residents. I was looking at the 33 million, Bob, and you're saying that's funded? That sheet is funded?
Everything on that sheet is funded with the exception of project number 16, the Greenway road improvement, Litchfield to Bullard,
Okay.
of which we made a budget adjustment this year
Right.
for another reason, and there's still a significant amount of those funds that may or may not be available, but the
Okay.
majority of these projects are funded.
Okay, and I just did quick math. 19 million of that is either impact fees or MPC bond money. Has nothing to do with the general fund capital improvement. Okay, and I want to separate those out because we have a lot of. You're running a lot of businesses, Bob. Okay.
Yes.
There's a lot of businesses, and they all got different profit and loss statements, and they got different asset and liability balance sheets, right?
Right.
So I think we need to look at all those businesses separately in terms of health and what we can do. What's the capacity that we can do to help our residents? Okay.
Okay.
And so that's where I'm coming from. I think that I agree with the mayor in terms of voter turnout. I can't tell you. I mean, just this weekend, I surveyed a lot of young people at an event in front of the movie theater. Tons of young people, and it was like 80% of them didn't vote. Okay. And then I ran into one of my friends at Walmart who works at Walmart, and she was talking about the kindergarten and how she didn't know what she was going to do with her child, and she was just And I said, so did you vote? She goes, no, I didn't vote. I said, why didn't you vote? And she says, because I don't want to be on the list for jury duty. Okay, so we have some obstacles out there that we need, that either perceived or real, that we need to be aware of, especially with young people where both mom and dad are both working, and the time is, they're impoverished in terms of time, and we need to figure out how to get to them. I'm serious, even if we need to go door to door, talk to them how important voting is and being involved, and voting yes or no, but voting and being involved, because we have a segment of our residents who are very involved, and so anyway, that's I also agree with working with Dysart School District, and I think all of us need to get smarter about school financing, how it's financed, and me included. And I'm starting to study it a little bit, but there's areas school financing is different than city financing, as you guys know, and we just need to be sensitive on what it really means, because seriously, very frankly, it's hard for me to advocate for something that I don't understand. Okay, if I understand how their financing works, I know how our financing works, so I'm there as an advocate. Okay, but I don't understand how schools are financed. Okay. So it's hard for me to be an advocate out there, work with the school district, but I don't understand that. Okay. Does that make sense?
It does,
Bob? Okay.
It does.
So I think we all, as a city council, if we're gonna really support Dysart School District, we got to get smarter about how they're financed and why they need the money, and what it does for the children of this city, for adequate financing. I'm not saying they're underfinanced or overfinanced. I'm not making that judgment because I don't understand it. Okay? And there's a lot of people in our city that don't understand how schools are financed. So there's some people in our city that say, oh, they want to fund, oh, they're already spending too much money. They got too much in administration. They got too much of this. They got that. Okay, I understand that. But is that really a perception, or is that the reality? And what does that all mean? And I think we just all got to get smarter about it. Okay?
Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. As a relatively new, still, surprise resident, Arizona resident, what struck me coming from California and Indiana and seeing different systems, it was that we do it a little bit different here. We've got, our system is set up for school funding. You got the 3 R's that are done by the basic property tax levy. And it doesn't really equate what we're sending in. It's kind of gets shuffled through the state, and they send us the money. They try to equalize it and make sure districts are equal. But then the legislature in its wisdom has come up with something called an override. kind of a negative name. Well, you gotta, if you want to have these things, you got to spend and vote and approve it's like for 7-year approval. You got to keep on coming back to the voters and saying, approve this. So in our case, our community took that step back in 2000, passed the first override 15 years ago. So we had a kind of a not so good school district that kind of, with this extra 15% of the money for the budget, got better and got to the point where they were highly rated, A-rated this year. Took about 15 years to do that. But it was through that override process where you were able to fund full-day kindergarten, and it only allows you to do that. It allowed you to, in our case, allowed you to lower the class sizes, which are still kind of high. It allowed you to have the arts and the PE and intervention for people that are falling behind on reading and things like that. Those are the only things that the override can approve. But it's very confusing when you call it an override. And when it is 15% of the budget, it is going to be massive layoffs, not only this summer when they go into effect, but the following year, and a like amount, and the following year after that, because there's a 3-year phase out. That's a lot of people to lose, not only in jobs, but a lot of people that are helping our youth. And that kind of investment in getting our youth to a point where they can be good community members and contribute and go to their college or career ready. Not everybody's going to college, but our district makes them career ready as well. So yeah, it is a shame. It was not a new tax. It was what was in place for 15 years. So to lose some of that, to get a little bit of a tiny savings, and I think I'll save like a little over $100 this year. To me, the damage done to the community is far worse. To me, the damage done to my property value will be far worse than paying the $100, keeping the $100 I was already paying anyway. So that's my comments on that. Same thing with school bonds. They don't have a way to replace their school buses. They drive millions of miles a year. And this is how they would do it with a school bond. Their IT projects, school facilities. You know, the state pays for it up front, but if you've got to do anything else, it's on the community. So that's how important it is for anybody coming from out of state. And I think a lot of our residents come from out of state. They need to understand that's how it's put together. It's not like the override means it's an onerous tax. It means that's the opportunity for the community to weigh in and say, yeah, we value schools.
Excuse me, I'm
yes.
sorry for interrupting. I just want to make sure that we stay on the agenda.
Okay.
The agenda is for our capital improvement projects, and
Right.
while this is an exceedingly important issue,
Yes.
I do think that it would be better if we brought that back as a specifically agendized
Okay.
item.
So my next point was the city. The city has that same concerns, and because we're trying to accommodate both, is one thing that strikes me as different here is it's not the council that approves a capital project, a bond funding. We approve it going to the ballot, but it's the citizens that get to approve whether or not they want to do it. Is the time right? Is this the right direction we want to go? So that's real different for a lot of us that have moved here from other places. So we need to keep that in mind. I like the idea of at least addressing the reserves. One thing is, Government Finance Officers Association talks about having, for best practices, no less than 2 months, and that is our current policy, no less than 2 months reserve in the general fund. So I think that's good. But then when we go into our ratings, and earlier last year we adopted a policy that we will strive towards the highest rating. Our raters, Fitch, for example, in elevating our rating last year, said our rating increase reflects expectation that the city will maintain an ample financial cushion in light of its dependence on economically sensitive revenues, the sales taxes. So what they're saying to us, and they also said in a couple other places, same thing, they're saying, you probably shouldn't be doing just the minimum best practices 2 months. So I like the idea of considering going up. And in order to put this whole package together, I'd be willing to say, well, maybe we go towards 3 months. maybe do it over 2 years. So 2.5 this year, keep the other half in contingency. And then anything beyond that, maybe we can talk about reallocating and things like that. But there are things that, we've come through fixing the budget. There are things that we need to, we did that through a lot of saving. The Fire Council saved a lot of things, but we need to restore some things like the maintenance funds. Good example that was brought up a couple weeks ago, I believe, was crack sealing for streets. We have a budget of $2 million. We probably need $4 million. So before we do something like that, in context of how we allocate and structurally say how much should be going for capital projects and things like that, we need to take all that into account. So rather than me try to decipher all this, I like your idea. I think it'd be good for the city manager and the finance director to come back with kind of a recommendation on what we can do with reserve levels that might not only follow in line with helping us to signal to the rating agencies we're looking for additional upgrades, because anything we ever do borrow with a higher rating is going to cost less. So I think that'd be good to have a recommendation on that before we kind of just shoot from the hip and say, let's do this or that. So I'll probably come back and talk some more, but I'm going to give somebody else a time.
Councilwoman Villanueva.
Let me know if I get out of hand. Talking about Dysart not being a very good school. Dysart has always been a good school. The only thing different is that we didn't have the residents, we didn't have the businesses. We only had a lot of grapes, a lot of oranges, and a lot of roses that they didn't give us any money. So residents as well didn't pass bonds. So Dysart was very poor. But we did have a lot of good teachers, and there's some very successful students out there that are doctors and nurses and you can lawyers, whatever. I know those people, and I know they're out there, and they were in that area when Dysart was poor. I just wanted to bring that up. Mm-hmm. Second of all, I wanted to say that I had the pleasure of being on the board for 10 years, and I know what it is to lose students, because when I was on the board, I had a lot of good memories and a lot of bad memories. The good memories was that what I just mentioned, we had a very nice school. The bad memories was that we lost, because of the funding that we didn't have, we lost all our sports programs, all our extracurricular activities, all in 1 year. And our students left Dysart. They left to go to other schools to play ball, to be in the band, to be in the choir. And we don't want to do that again. It's not right for our city, it's not right for our students, and it's not right for our parents. So I totally support going and helping the Dysart district with their bond. And also, I would also like to see a committee to start looking at our bond issue this year, and at least give us a feeling of what we can do and what we need to do and how we can move forward. Mm-hmm. But I totally support for us to get together and work on the Dysart bond this year. They need it. We cannot afford to go again and have these programs lost. Thank you. I hope I didn't get out of hand.
I just want to remind.
Dysart means a lot to me.
I want to remind everybody on council that you can educate, you can advocate. You can do it personally, but not using government resources. So I do want to be careful that to the extent that City Manager Wiggenroth is talking about partnering, it's about educating and getting voter turnout. It is not about advocating, which you can do each individually on your own time, but not using city resources.
Thank you.
Very good. Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. I want to mention maybe 2 or 3 things, one a bit more specific than the other two. But first, I really want to thank staff. City Manager and your staff, for the way you put all this information together in response to some of the discussion we had at our last meeting. And I say that very sincerely. Really appreciate the way the information has been brought forward, the way the options have been brought forward, and that's really a credit to you and your staff. So I really, really do appreciate that. The more general things, I think the voter turnout initiative is just wonderful, as you mentioned, under any circumstance, whether we're in a bond election circumstance or a Dysart override circumstance, or just universally. I think that's a great effort for the city to launch. So that's great direction, I think. And I may be wrong, but I thought our city clerk was also exploring the mail-in ballot and the drop-off ballot, and that would simply be another dimension of that hopefully will help that overall voter turnout. Because as we looked at some of the, as all of us looked at some of the results of the Dysart override and what that turnout was district by district, it was really appalling in some instances how low that voter turnout was. And I understand it just overall it's lower than what it's been in a while. So I applaud that effort. I thank the city attorney for her comment, because that was my other question. We're talking about supporting Dysart. I don't know what that means, because I think in a correspondence that the city attorney sent us the first week in January, giving us some clarifying information about our role as individuals as well as a city as a whole. She made reference to a state statute that, to me at least, says pretty categorically you can't use city resources to advocate in support or in opposition for a ballot issue, whatever that ballot issue happens to be. So there is a very, very fine line in my mind between what support Dysart really means and what the city as a body can actually do. As individuals, it may be something entirely different. If you don't mind, let me just quote one line, and only one line, regarding that. Revised statute 9500-14 prohibits the use of city resources to support or oppose the outcome of an election, including measures that are subject to ballot approval, and then it goes through the detail of the statute. So I don't want people, and I certainly don't want to myself, misunderstand what support Dysart means. Because if we say support Dysart, that may create some expectations that as a body we simply cannot do by law. Lastly, and this is just a bit more specific, as it relates to the list of capital projects, and thank you for saying that consistently through this process you're going back and scrubbing, and I think that's good to continually go back and scrub. One item caught my eye, and that was the $17.4 million recreation center, and I'll tell you why it caught my eye. We already have 2 community centers, obviously not of this scope or this span or perhaps even this purpose, that we talk about as being underutilized. Now, what another $17.5 million recreation center is, frankly, I just don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it is. But perhaps as you go through the quote-unquote scrubbing, you can come back and talk a little more in detail about that item. Thank you.
Councilmember Williams.
I scrub daily myself, so. It's a good thing. No, thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the hard work of staff, and I appreciate kind of how you shifted the list and kind of prioritize these things. And I mean, in terms of critical projects and understanding that these things are things that are funded, I think that term critical project becomes very individual in terms of need right now. A critical project for somebody that lives on West Hearn in Sierra, Montana is somebody please pave my street. A critical project for somebody that needs a police officer on a 911 call is very different. A critical project for a family taking their kids to the East Valley in Chandler for a club softball game is very different. So critical projects become just very arbitrary, just very subjective. But in terms of where the money's allocated, where there's a backlog, I mean, there's ways of doing it, and you guys have done it, and I commend that. And as Councilmember Hall said before, I mean, $10 million for street projects, we could probably debate up here for a month in terms of what street projects need to be prioritized. So that debate will continue in perpetuity. My concern is in just kind of reiterating the same thing I said last council meeting, and the voter turnout, and I brought up some stats on my iPad and some things that I've been looking at over the past month or so at this. Voter turnout 2006, 60.47%, 2010, 55%, 2014, 36%. So the trend that we are on right now is disheartening. And that's statewide. That's not in Surprise. That's statewide. It's a national issue. It's a state issue. We have some very experienced elected officials up here and out in the community that have been part of campaigns and been involved in engaging voters and bringing people in on issues, on candidacies. We just had a governor's election. 36% was the turnout. So that, just the math involved in that. There were some very high profile organizations that were running campaigns, 36% turnout. And so that in itself is something that I'm glad we as a city are looking at, because it's not, and I don't know, you have to continue to do the study of the phenomena. I don't know what the voter turnout was like during the Great Depression. Maybe it's involved in economics, because you could time 2006 to now with just a down cycle, a recession, the Great Recession that we lived through. So maybe people aren't as engaged at the voter ballot when times are tough and they're thinking about, I'm turning my cable off. I talked to somebody the other day, actually turned his cable off. He gets his news on the internet, and his TV is Netflix, and it's Hulu Plus, and it's Amazon. They're not watching TV. I'm not watching Fox. I'm not watching MSNBC. I'm not watching those things. So we're living in very interesting times right now where there's a lot of media, but the way people grasp onto information is much different than we're traditionally used to. So my concern is still the math involved in this. We need to go to bond. I am not in favor of option 3 at all. I would be in favor initially up here, if you made me vote tonight, of option 2, for the simple fact that I think if schools are not successful in this community, that it doesn't matter what kind of roads or clubhouses we build, that nobody's going to want to live here and put their kids to school here. It becomes problematic. I think there's a lot of folks that are very optimistic. Me trying to be one of them and really embrace the idea that you could have multiple ballot issues and somebody would go down the line and support all of them. But I think that's exactly what that is. I think based on the numbers, that's really optimistic. I think that we need to engage folks. We need to get a sense of urgency. I think that across the street, they're trying to do that tonight, is create that sense of urgency from stakeholders that are involved in the decision making around our communities, around our region. That's what we need to continue to do. We need to embrace that. We need to support education. And I think ultimately we need to look at how do we do what we need to do as a city as well. But if I were to vote tonight and I need to prioritize, I got to put that other stuff on top, and I got to put these projects right underneath that, because this is really important. This is really important to me and to my family. Just personally, this is really important. It's important for the entire community, but it's just, in talking to some folks over the weekend, there's passion on all sides. There's passion on all sides, and I don't disagree with any of them. I really don't. And I want to continue the conversation, so I would be in favor of really putting that committee together and having that conversation, but looking at, okay, we're approaching this with extreme caution. I couldn't tell you tonight that we should put this on the ballot in November 2015. I can't do it. When I see 36% turnout, I don't care who the organization is that's running the campaign. They ran a governor's campaign. They ran these things, and this was the turnout that they saw. And so, we want success for everyone. We want success, and I think we can get there, but we have to be very strategic. And I think putting something off for 12 months, and I know that, again, this is going to be a political conversation now. There's council seats up. There's a president's election up. Well, you know what? Then maybe we'll get a better voter turnout, and there'll be a sense of urgency for people to, hey, I want that rec center or whatever that might be. I want that in my community. I would be in favor of doing something like that if I had to vote tonight. Otherwise, I need to continue on this conversation. I need to see where we're going. But I would not say indefinite, and I would not say, hey, we got to go to 2015. It's just the numbers, for me right now, the numbers would not square out, and we could cannibalize each other. So thank you.
Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. Kind of want to honor our advice from our city attorney. The voter turnout initiative, can we structure that in a way where it abides by, we're just trying to get voters out? Okay, so we can be in compliance. That's doable, I think. Mm-hmm. The second part is the education and the stakeholders. Can we keep it just to education without advocating, and can we put parameters on that so we don't trip ourselves up? Because I don't want us to get in trouble with state law on that.
It is absolutely the intent of everybody in this room that we not violate state law, that we will educate. You are allowed to say these are the pros and these are the cons. Okay. You just can't, basically literally say vote yes on, proposition, whatever. Yeah.
And
Mr. Wigginroth.
Madam Chair, members of the council, I think there would be the educate. But I think even to a greater degree, us working together will build a team approach, so that it's very clear that we're on the same team. So I agree that we will carefully make sure we're not breaking any state laws, but almost to the greatest degree, joining hands. And being in the same room and talking about the issues together, that might even be the greatest value of us doing this.
I like that because, as the mayor said in the State of the City this morning, one surprise, that resonates with me. We each, as council members representing districts, we each have different things our constituents want. And that's our job, to advocate for them. But it's also our job, I think, to advocate on one surprise, because some things I've got to say, hey, my area might take a back seat because this is a bigger thing that'll help the entire city, the whole area. Getting back to the three options, I agree with the city manager. I don't really much like option number 3. When I look at options number 1 and 2, I think we can still have both on the table until June. Because there might be a point in time in June when we decide as a council, do we even put it on the ballot? Where are we going to be? We might have additional information. I was a little concerned a couple weeks ago that I wouldn't get that information, but we did get that information. I see, the process for 1 and 2 is, okay, if we form a committee to get out there, that's to help educate the public. If we take that time and keep that discussion going, so we get a sense of where we are as a city and as a public to help us make a decision in June. That I want to take that time. What's the best decision at that point in time? Because I might change my mind. I'm leaning towards option 1 myself, but I don't want to push anybody else in that direction until June, where we go. Yeah, the committee is important anyway. So. I'm lost my train of thought, so I'll pass off again. Okay. I've got so much to say.
I'm gonna try to recap a couple things that I've been hearing around the table, and I really want to emphasize this too, because I think voter turnout to everyone understands that this is critical, voter turnout. But to a comment that Councilmember Tandy made earlier, we all come from different places that handle it differently. So do the voters. They all came to this, and I've heard this time and again, particularly in the last month, that they didn't, and some people actually come here from places where the cities actually run the schools. So everybody does it differently, and so it's really critical that we find ways to educate. And that is something that is allowed, and it's very, very important that we do that. And we can do a better job, I think, if we're working together with Dysart and with the city to educate. The voter turnout piece is extremely important, building that sense of urgency from our voters that they need to step up to the plate and vote for what they think is right in the community, whichever way they want to go, but vote for what they think is right for the community. I did hear a number of the surplus, as if the surplus is more than the set aside, the 2-month set aside. So if you would real quickly just clarify that for anybody who's still wondering what the difference is between the $27 million surplus and how it includes the 2 months reserve, if you could.
Yes,
please.
Madam Chair. So the general fund is like a big checkbook for the city, and we pay our bills out of it. And at the end of the year, we take a look at what we have left over. And what we are planning to have left over at the end of this year is $27 million. The council, you have set a policy that says we need that 27, be it 27 or 10 or whatever the number is, we want you to have 2 months of operating funds set aside. So that number is $14.5 million. Okay, so of that 27, 14.5 by your policy, we are always going to keep there set aside in case there was a catastrophe, that we have 2 months set aside that we could operate. So the difference between that 14.5 and the 27 is what I'm referring to as the excess over your policy. And so we could do one of a couple things. As Councilmember Tandy mentioned, we could increase the policy from 2 months to 2.5 months to 3 months over a time period. Or we could take that and say, right now we have a critical capital need, and say, for example, as Councilmember Hall said, 10 of that would bring it down to from 27 to 17. We would still have an excess of the 2 months, the 14.5, but we could use that money one time. We would only be able to use it once, but we could use that for capital projects or anything that the council desires to spend it on.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So, and one other point that I keep hearing about how Dysart lost an override, but we have another school district in the city of Surprise, and they lost their override as well. And I would point out that in future years, as we continue to grow, this is how important it is that we work together, because whatever we grow in terms of households, we are sending new students to the school district or to their choices of charter schools or private schools. And that will be the same as we grow up into the northern reaches of the city. We will also be sending students to that school district. Someday, we may very well be not only serving them as a city, but Dysart may not be the largest school district in the city. It might be Nottaburg. So we need to be thinking strategically about how we serve from the city's perspective and how we coordinate with our school districts to make certain that we're not overburdening them with our visions of households. I think that's one of the reasons why we've talked as a city council strategically. We're focusing more on the jobs. We're focusing more on large businesses that will actually grow our tax base and help all of the taxing jurisdictions. So that's something that I think is really important to remember. I also want to acknowledge that the city has done a really great job, I believe, in working with the school district in trying to make sure that we are sharing our facilities, because we don't want to see kids not being able to participate in sports. So we're sharing facilities, but if the override is providing the operations, then we've got an issue. And so we need to make certain that if we're sharing facilities and we have programs that are foundering for lack of operating dollars, we need to be thinking about how we can make certain that people are not losing their opportunities to participate in recreational activities. That is a serious quality of life consideration for our residents, and keeping them here and keeping them feeling like Surprise is a place they want to stay. So I personally like the concept of moving the ball forward as a city and making sure that we are partnering with Dysart and, yes, even Natterburg, even at this date, partnering with them on how we move the ball forward. I think it's critical. We affect them, they affect us, and I think it's important that these committees, I would like to see a committee formed that is, as Bill Pupo said, cross-pollinated, so that making sure that we're communicating and all singing from the same sheet of music. And that's what I would like to see, making sure that we don't cancel out any option. I agree with John. I would never support the final option because I don't want to diminish the asset that is the city of Surprise. I want to make sure that we're focusing on moving forward strategically. So I would like to see us think in terms of setting up a committee that, as perhaps as Mr. Tandy suggests, helps that committee bring back some recommendations to both the school district as well as the city council on a recommendation in June to determine whether or not it should be 15 as a united effort, or it should be 16, or it should be 17 as still a united effort, but timing-wise, it's better. I think that is the best way to keep the discussion alive and relevant to partnering over the long haul. And that would be my thought. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm for option one, Bob. I want to keep the conversation going, and I want this committee you're talking about, when it is formed, if we agree on it up here, to really hone the message. I'm going to give you an example. Why do we need Fire Station 308? Okay, why do we need it? The economic, I mean, you know the answer, but I want to make sure that everybody on that committee understands what that does, what that can do for economic development in our railplex. Because we don't think about that, but we're starting to get a lot of interest, and the mayor talked about the company today in the state of the city, the new announcement with Iris, and you know, I'm sure they're concerned about fire coverage in certain elements. Okay, sure, it's going to be sprinkled, and we know that, but what does the fire station do for us as a city? Because it's an expensive proposition. It's $6 million of the bond. Okay, but what does it do for us in terms of time response? What does it do for us for a company coming in and looking at us? You see what I'm saying, Bob? Those kind of things. Councilman Biondo brings up a great point. The regional multi-generational recreation center. What does that mean? And what does it really mean? What does it buy us in terms of quality of life? What does it buy us in terms of attracting more residents to move to Surprise? And we talk about jobs, 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 jobs. That's, I mean, that's all 7 of us, that's the top of our mind. We need more jobs here. Okay, people leave the city, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 leave the city to go to work. We want them to stay here. How do we create more jobs? Okay, and everybody's told us how we do it. You know, we create more recreation, we create more arts, we create more entertainment, and we create companies that come here to employ them. So it's not enough just to work here. We want them to live here. We don't want them to come to Peoria and then drive back to Peoria. We want them to stay here. And why should they stay here? We got to give them entertainment. We got to give them culture. We got to give them Parks and Rec, you know, for their kids and all the rest of it. Those are all components. And I think this bond here, the list here, adds to that. They also got to get here. They also got to drive around the city in a way that it doesn't create accidents and doesn't hold them up in terms of time. We have a lot of people live in Surprise that work in Luke Air Force Base. Going down Litchfield is a nightmare. It really is. I mean, it's kind of dangerous sometimes. Okay, so we need to look at that. How can we facilitate our people, our F-16 pilots or our F-35 pilots or the mechanics that live in Surprise that drive down to Luke Air Force Base? You know, how can we impact their lives more? Okay, so anyway, I'm just saying, Councilman Biondo brings up a good point, and the aquatic center. Okay, what does an aquatic center do for you in terms of economic development? Okay, take the aquatic center example that we saw down in Tucson that we toured last year or 2 years ago at the League of Cities. I mean, it's amazing the swim meets they get from all over the western United States. Okay, so, but I can't sell Jim on that without having numbers. What is it really going to do for us? What is adding another 8 or 10 pickleball courts do for us economically? What does it do for our hotels? All our hotels, you guys, I'm telling you right now, are running about 60% occupancy year round. That's not good enough. They should be running 80% to make any really good money, have a good return on their investment, okay? 60% doesn't do it, all right? And we have teams that stayed at Windmill Suites. They don't want to, and I shouldn't even say, I'm going to forget I said that. We have teams that have stayed in a hotel in Surprise, don't want to stay there anymore because they're not investing in their property. So they're changing properties. Okay, we got some people that are staying in other cities that because of certain reasons, because the hotels are run down a little bit, okay? But they can't reinvest in their hotels unless they have occupancy and revenue, et cetera. So it's all a big mix together. We got to fill our hotels. We got to have our restaurants successful. I'm tired of seeing restaurants come in and go out of business in our town. But it all works together. But look, all this list here, I want a bunch of guys smarter than me on a committee looking at each one of these items and saying, what does that do for us for a city? Is that something that should be on the bond because it'll have high impact for our residents for $100 a year, property taxes, or whatever the number is. You know what I'm saying, Bob? Mm-hmm. And we've got some great people on our CRS board. They're sharp as a tack. They're analytical. We got great people on our Planning and Zoning Commission. Okay, so there's a lot of brain power there, and I'd like that committee to come back and say yes or no, or when. Do we do it this year? Do we do it next year? Or whatever. Me, I'd like to do it sooner than later because I think we've waited a long time. We've really gone through a lot of problems in the last 6 years. We all know, and I think it's time for us to move ahead and elevate this city to another level. And but I want their feedback. I want them to analyze this list, okay? So that's where I'm coming from. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you. I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different direction, but maybe end up in the same place as some others. I think we're talking about 3 different committees. We're talking about a committee that in fact would scrub the capital projects list. We're talking about a committee that would do joint efforts with DICERT, whatever would be involved with that. And we're talking about a committee that would make a specific recommendation about whether to go to a bond issue or not, and at what point in time.
Right.
Those are three different committees to me. I don't think you can amalgamate all that into one, first and foremost. Secondly, a couple of things are pretty clear to me. I was going to say some of this later during the course of the meeting when there's the action item on the agenda, but I'll say them now. A couple of things clear to me when looking at a bond election process. The appointment of a citizen committee specifically for the bond election process is a clear declaration to proceed. Now, obviously, some point along the way, the council can say we are or we're not going to proceed,
Right.
but the council has made a clear declaration that we're going to proceed at this point in time with the possible bond election. It's often described in the literature, in fact, as the second step in the bond election process, the first step being what Councilmember Hall is describing as scrubbing the capital improvement list. That's the first step in the bond election process. The second step is forming that bond election committee, and I'm using those words specifically to distinguish it from the other two functions. I will suggest for consideration, we all agree that there needs to be a bond election committee. The question in my mind is when. Because once you declare, then you have said to the public, we have said to the public, if we form that bond election committee tonight, that our intent is to go forward. Now, we may change that process in June or May or whenever that bond election committee comes back. Let's assume for a second that they come back and say, yeah, go forward right now. Do we take that recommendation or don't we? That was my comment at the last meeting. Be careful what you ask for because you might get it. Do we go forward with it at that point and negate the recommendation from that bond election committee? And if we decide to go forward with it, then do we, for example, say, sorry, DICERT, we're going to go head-to-head with you on the November ballot because that's what our committee has recommended. And I'm not as, well, I shouldn't say it that way, but I will anyway, as concerned as I am about the relationship between the city and the district. I'm more concerned about the relationship between the city and the hundreds, literally, of parents and teachers, and I can think of 143 offhand, who might not be particularly enthused about that going forward. The third problem with that, if we do that right now, is that we're also saying, okay, we make the decision in June. So let's go out and do our public information campaign in July and August, when a significant portion of the voters are gone for the year. That's not in our best interests, in my mind. It's certainly not in the best interests of those voters who are gone. My recommendation, and in fact, I may anyway put it in the form of a motion on the action item agenda, is to form a committee, and this is why I'm coming back to perhaps where Councilmember Williams was earlier, maybe some others, to form the bond election committee, which would still give an opportunity to form the Scrubbing the Capital Projects Committee with perhaps joint efforts that you're describing, to put a committee together with the relationship between the city and DICERT. That could be done right now as a separate committee and start examining all those relationships. Put the bond election committee in December. Appoint it in December. That solves three problems in my mind. It means first of all that we have declared to the voters that our intent is to have a bond election in 2016. Not indefinitely, and not in 1 or 2 years, but in 2016 we would have a bond election, possibly, depending upon the results of that election committee. It would say to those hundreds of parents and teachers in the DICERT system, we've decided not to go head-to-head with you. because in our best interests, it's not as though progress is stopping. We have over $30 million of funded projects to go forward. Maybe we ought to get some of those done before we go out to the taxpayers and ask them to pony up for another 60 million. Well, we don't even have progress on those. Well, we have some progress on those. And the third thing it solves is the calendar, because then we can come back in late January, February, March, and do a public information campaign, a full public information campaign when everybody's here and a significant number of people are not gone, and then come back in latter August, September, October with a full information campaign for the November 16 ballot. I'm through.
Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. I like to put everything in context all the time. I pulled my tax bill, and when I add up the amounts that I pay for school taxes, including the override, it's the largest portion. So we already value schools. But when we're put in context what a potential bond initiative would be, it's less than 10% of what we're already paying for schools. So it's not a significant amount. And if you start breaking it up into 3 different components, it literally could be maybe $2 a month for somebody to maintain public safety. You know, I'm hoping to hear from the chief why he would need a property room. I'm thinking it's probably so that we can maintain chain of evidence, so that trials can proceed and we can convict the criminals. That's all a part of the puzzle that makes us the 9th safest city in the U.S. So those are all important things, but again, let's put it in context. So, if the override goes and gets restored, it just puts us back to where we were already paying before. If we were to do this at the same time, it would basically be about 10% of the school, and we've already saw the numbers. It's not a lot, not a significant amount. So there will be some people that will be too much for it. Every one of us will have people in our district that will vote no against it if we put it on the ballot. Every one of us will have people that will vote yes for it, and they'll be passionate on both sides. But I think we need to get the committee going as soon as possible, so that we can take that education process and keep on educating. Not only, it's not just summer. When the committee gets formed, that's part of the education process right then. The timing-wise of our decision to put it on the ballot, June 26th, I think has more to do with our appropriation schedule, the budget schedule. So we need to adopt a capital plan in that time frame. So I just think the city's manager's recommendation was well thought out with the staff, and I'd like to keep on doing that. Last example I'll use is when I moved here about 6 years ago, we haven't done a lot of capital projects, and the capital projects we do, the 30 million, Councilmember Skip Hall already mentioned, it's not significantly taxpayer dollars. Those are impact fees. Those are not the voters' dollars. So this would be the first new ask in years and years of whether or not the voters want to put a little bit extra to build the community. So for whether it be the voters in Councilmember Winter's district that are saying, when am I going to get my grocery store? The biggest cul-de-sac in the neighborhood, There's a capital project in there that will help do some roads that potentially we could get reimbursed from the developer when they do come in and develop it. So we could then spend it again for something else when we get that reimbursement. This is a tool for us to help keep things moving along instead of being a dead stop. And if we take the option 2, okay, 6 years becomes 8. Well, it's actually longer than that, because it'll take a year or 2 to get plans and designs done and then construction done. So we're really 10. So when we finally funded the impact fees for the Viramonte and Surprise Farms parks. There were people that came and said, you know, I've been fighting for this for so long. My kindergartner now is out of high school, and they're gone. Well, the people that when I moved here, that were kindergartners, they're already 6th graders. Scenario number 2 puts them 10th graders. And that's what I'm trying to do, is how do we build the future for our kids so that we can encourage them to stay rather than thinking about moving out of the town. That's my vision. How do we build this as all the different pieces of the puzzle? And the education process of getting to hear from the fire chief why we need Station 308 and also our economic development people, because that's critical. And I look back at the old city records from 10 years ago when there were debates, similar debates about having a new fire station going in the Sun City Grand. Well, the run times were long.
Yeah.
They were too long. And the council back then made the strategic decision that for safety purposes, it's time to go now. And I just want to get the city moving, and I want to have the option. I don't want the citizens to, by the way, my district actually did pass the override, if they were the only ones voting. And I think many of the districts were represented the same way. So I think some of it is an education process. Some of it's voter get out the vote. But I just think we need to go through the process that was laid out so we can do the education and keep our schools excellent. And I do want to respond real quickly to Councilmember Villanueva, because I knew she did 10 years of volunteer service on the school board at a time when the resources weren't there. They did as good as they could. We are still in that same boat. You know, we've been trying to get better all the way. They finally got the first A rating, but our school district, and also in context, is still funded far less than the state average, even with the override. So those are all things that need to be factored in. And I know how important it is. I actually serve on a private school board as the vice chair, and we have severe financial issues and concerns. So I know exactly, not exactly the 10 years that you put into it, but I honor that. So what I'm hearing is everybody here supports the pieces of the puzzle of education and making our community. And again, that's key, what the mayor said this morning. I really liked that. The first time I think I really sunk in. One surprise. Not only Dysart, but Natterburg as well. One surprise. Not only Sun City Grand, not Copper Canyon Ranch, not Marley Park. One surprise, the entire area.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm going to recognize Councilwoman Villanueva, and I'm also cognizant of the time. It's 10 minutes until 6. I know that there are members of the public that wish to speak. Some have already, I think, noted in at the regular meeting, but I want to give the opportunity because you did come here, and if you would like to weigh in, I want to offer that opportunity. So, Councilwoman Villanueva.
I just wanted to express my concern. I think we should go forward with a committee, and I think the committee would know upfront that that the board has a final decision whether we are going to go forward with this bond. I think upfront they would know that. So I recommend that we go ahead and form a committee as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Ms. Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to let you guys know, based on the discussion tonight, we do have a draft resolution. However, it's going to be my recommendation we go through that draft resolution tonight at the regular agendized item, but that we bring it back on the 3rd for actual action, because I hear enough disagreement that there would be no way for me to actually formulate appropriate language. But I do think we need to have that discussion tonight, and then just to let you know. So I wouldn't be recommending you take a vote. It is obviously up to you, but we have that language that I'll hand out during the break.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I would just like to open a call to the public. Is there anyone that wishes to come forward at this time to speak to the council on this item? Mr. Planetta.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Mike Planetta. Surprise, Arizona, 85374. What's my address? 16192 North 158th Avenue. Madam Mayor and Council, I just got to tell you, I'm extremely impressed with the conversations going on here. And Mr. Biondo probably won't believe this, but I actually agree with what you're saying. I think that's a very good idea. And with what Mr. Vice Mayor Williams was saying too, I can see a lot of different things from different areas. And obviously my passion is Parks and Recs. That's why I'm on the CRS Board Commission, because I feel like I can really help out and make a difference there. But, I think I got to give this council kudos for what you did with our finances. And I'm excited that we're even at the point that we're even talking about a bond now, because I've been, as you know, Mayor, I've been looking to do this for a lot of years, but I know timing is extremely important, and we've got to be real strategic, like you were all saying. And I would agree with you 100% that maybe like Mr. Biondo laid it out pretty well. I thought, I would like to have it yesterday, obviously, but we got to be smart about it, and hopefully, I just throw this out there. God forbid this bond override doesn't pass in November. Then you have to decide: do we wait again? Do we, what are we going to do? So, I fully support the bond override, and I plan on going to the meeting tonight too to go over there. But Councilwoman Villanueva, you spent 10 years on the school board, and I understand. I feel for you. I did it for 4 years, and it's probably the most thankless job I've ever done. But there is a lot of gratitude that you get out of it, knowing that you're trying to make a difference. But I really appreciate. I just want to tell you, I really appreciate your efforts and the level of intelligent conversation that's going on here to try and figure out how do we go about doing this. And we've got a great leader in Mr. Wingenroth. So whatever I can do to help the cause, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to come forward, if you would?
Hello, everyone. As Wayne Turner, 13306 West Caribbean Lane in Surprise, 85379. Everybody, thank you so much. This is really music to my ears, the conversations I'm hearing and I've been reading about over the last few weeks. As Mr. Planetta said, him and I have been talking about this it seems for eons. I've lived in this town for 18 years, and it's just so refreshing to see we're finally starting to get out of that rut we're in, and we're moving forward. With the ideas, I see a great movement with option 1 and 2. My concern with number 2, though, is if we do wait, then we take a chance on that override failing. If that override fails, are we so far behind the 8 ball because then it's mass panic and possibly people leaving the city that we can't get anything done? That's something we really need to look into as well. I can see great explanations, great arguments for both of these, but we have to do it smartly. As part of the CRS Advisory Board, we would be more than happy, willing, and able to help in any way, shape, or form. I would welcome to be on any of the committees set up that will work on this. And thank you very much, and let's move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to address the council at the workshop this evening? I see a lot of nodding heads. All right. So at this time, we will take a break. There is no executive session for the workshop. We have no further items on the agenda, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I second the motion.
Motion has been made and seconded to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.